Hello, I'm Professor Suzannah Lipscomb. I'm an expert on the 16th century. I've written about Henry VIII and about women in the 16th century and about witchcraft. And here from the University of Roehampton, I want to tell you today about witches, witch beliefs and witch hunts in the 16th and 17th centuries. Now, witches are everywhere. You probably grew up with witches, in books of course. The witch that dominated my youth was Roald Dahl's Grand High Witch. Remember her? She had feet without toes, she had a head as bald as an egg, and she thought that children smelled of dog's droppings. But maybe your witch was from Harry Potter or Mildred the Worst Witch, I don't know. But the fact is that we have the idea of witches in our culture. They're a very potent symbol because they're a symbol of inversion, of the world turned upside down, of everything not being what it should be. And the word witch is still used as a misogynistic judgment against women, particularly politicians. Neither Theresa May nor Hillary Clinton escaped the charge. But when we think about witches, the idea of witches having real evil magical powers, then we have to go back centuries. The first evidence of witchcraft belief that I've come across is thousands of years old. It's in ancient Greece, an alleged witch called Theoris of Lemnos, who was charged with casting spells and casting incantations and using magic for harmful ends. But if we move through history, we find that every 100 or so years we can find evidence of witchcraft beliefs existing then. So we move on a few years to the Roman Empire. The Roman poet Tibullus, who promised his mistress in around 30 BC that he'd found a truthful witch who could perform rites and spells that would persuade her husband that they weren't having an affair, even if he saw it happening before his very eyes. We go on a few more years to the reign of Tiberius. In the Chronicle of AD 354, we find that Tiberius executed 45 sorcerers and 85 sorceresses. A few more hundred years, Emperor Valentian forbade haruspicy. Haruspicy is divination, so fortune-telling, using the entrails of animals. And then if we get over to 789, Charlemagne ordained that night witches should be executed. Athelstan, king of the Anglo-Saxons in the 900, ordered punishment for anyone casting spells that led to death. And the first witch trial in the British Isles happened in the 14th century. So people have believed in witchcraft for thousands of years. But there was one moment in history when witches were thought to be especially dangerous. There was one period of time in which they were persecuted, prosecuted and executed in large numbers. And that period was between about 1450 and 1750. And if we want to zero in, it's really between 1560 and 1650. And the question is why? Because it hadn't happened before, and so far it hasn't happened since. And so what I'm going to try and answer in this short series of lectures is why it happened then. But first of all, I thought we'd get a sense of your level of knowledge. So think to yourself in the quietness of your hearts, or indeed shout out loud, whether you think these things are true or false. So the first one, witches were ducked on stools. In actual fact, it's not true. Witches weren't ducked on stools. That was the punishment for scolds. Scolds were women who slandered, who stirred up strife, who were in discord with each other, people who had opinions, always women, notice. Witches were swam, and we'll talk about that in a later lecture. How about this one? All convicted witches were burned alive. In actual fact, that's not true either. In England and New England, witches were hanged. In Scotland and Spain and elsewhere, witches were burned, but not alive. They were garroted or strangled first, which must have been a great comfort to them. How about this one? This is a quote. The church burned at the stake an astounding 5 million women. True or false? Well, I'm afraid you know that some of that is not true already. You know about the burnings. What about the numbers? 5 million. Well, it would be astounding if it were true. In fact, it would be much of the population of Europe at the time. In fact, it's estimated that 90,000 people were accused of witchcraft, and around half of that, 45,000, were executed. So who is this great authority giving this quote? Well, that comes from Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code. And the other thing about it is it accuses the church. But one of the things that I think is most fascinating about the witch hunts is that actually this isn't coming from the church. The late medieval church helped only insofar as it linked the idea of witches with the new idea that they were in league with the devil. But the vast majority of trials took place in secular law courts. So this is no frenzied free-for-all. This is no ecclesiastical crusade. This is carried out before the law. And we'll talk about that later in the lectures as well. Anyway, enough myth. Let's get on to some historical truths. Because in about 1500, just about everyone believed in the utter reality and potent power of the supernatural. Magical beliefs and practices easily mingled with Orthodox Christian belief. So, for example, in 1517, Alonso González de la Pintata described his cure for hemorrhoids. He said, you take the sick person to a fig tree, you have him kneel facing east with his hat off, you bless him, you recite a Pater Noster and an Ave Maria, then you cut down 9 figs and you take them to a place where neither the sun nor smoke can get at them, and when the figs have dried out, the piles will be cured. So it was very much thought that magic could be benign. Magic could bring you good luck. You might wear an amulet, you might put a shoe in your chimney, you might carry around herbs. And it was very common to turn to somebody in the village, a local practitioner of beneficent magic, known in England as cunning men and women, in circumstances that were inexplicable or uncertain. So you might go to a cunning man or a cunning woman if you wanted a love potion, or if you wanted a cure for infertility. They also claimed to be able to divine the location of lost and stolen goods. So one particular method was to hang a sieve by shears and to nominate suspects. This is called cosinomancy. And the sieve would rotate by magic when the guilty party was named. So quite literally open to manipulation. Magical practitioners believed also that they could cure sickness, and they would do this by burying an animal alive, by boiling eggs in urine, by tying salt and herbs into a cow's tail, and often also by blaming and locating the witch who had caused the sickness. And then they would make the witch and the person who was sick meet each other and force the witch to heal the person. And of course, what we can understand as what's going on there is these moments of reconciliation were probably acting as therapeutic placebo effects. But the supernatural could also be malevolent. Witches were said to use their magical powers to carry out maleficium, or harmful magic, so they could cause damage, injury, or even death to persons, animals, and property. To do this, they drew on a mysterious supernatural power. Many people at the time believed that witches got their power through a pact with the devil. Now, witches and belief in witches was Orthodox doctrine. It's actually even in the Bible. In Exodus 22:18, it said, in the translation used at the time, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live," even though critics questioned the translation from the original Hebrew. But belief in witches is very different from the legal prosecution and execution of people for witchcraft. And so what we need to think about next is why witches were persecuted. And we'll do that in the next lecture.